He stood on stage in front of 200 guests, thanking the family for trusting him to lead, while I sat near the back, not even listed in the program. What no one knew was that in my purse, I carried a court order naming me the sole trustee of our grandfather's legacy. So when the applause faded, I walked up, handed the MC the envelope, and calmly said, "There's been a misunderstanding. I wasn't cut off. I was put in charge." And right then, my brother's fiancée collapsed in her heels. "Hi, I'm Jenna. This is the story of how my family tried to rewrite the future without me, and how I reminded them who really held the pen." Before we jump into the story, if you don't mind, let me know where you're from by leaving a comment below. That way I can send a special hello your way. Now go ahead, grab yourself a warm cup of water, and find a comfy spot. It's time to begin the story. The envelope was heavier than it needed to be. Thick, creamy cardstock, gold embossing that caught the sunlight as I turned it over in my hands. I already knew what it was. I'd seen the social media teasers, heard the whispers from second cousins at last month's birthday barbecue. The Walker Legacy Gala, our family's grandest event in nearly a decade. I slid my finger under the seal and unfolded the invitation slowly, as if I could delay what I already suspected. There they were, 6 names etched in cursive beside the words, "Proudly presented by." My parents, of course. Dylan and Elaine, front and center. Even Aunt Karen and Uncle Leo made the list, though they lived in Asheville and hadn't been active in family affairs in years. But me? Not a mention, not even an honorary footnote. I set the invitation down beside the pumpkin bread I'd pulled from the oven earlier. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and roasted pecans, but the sweetness didn't land the same. Grandpa Calvin used to say, "Legacy isn't what they give you. It's what they try to take from you." I used to think he meant that metaphorically, about respect, not paperwork. That Saturday, I drove out to my parents' house for brunch. Charleston was having one of those golden fall mornings, crisp but still clinging to the tail end of summer warmth. Their house sat just off the edge of a sleepy cul-de-sac, dressed in white columns and creeping ivy like it knew it had something to prove. Mom answered the door with a cloth napkin still tucked into her collar, like she hadn't realized I was due to arrive until I rang the bell. "Come in, honey," she said, smoothing the napkin down. "We were just finishing up." She meant everyone else was eating. The dining room table was already full. Dylan and Elaine at the far end, both with matching espresso cups and that kind of shared smirk people develop when they're always talking behind someone's back. Elaine, all polished and confident, offered a wave. "I saved you a seat," she said, "over by the sideboard." I took it without a word. They talked over me, about the guest list, floral arrangements, catering tastings, all of it. Elaine mentioned something about the Walker legacy aesthetic, and Dylan nodded like a good student. Mom piped in now and then to suggest flower colors, soft golds and navy, to match the family crest. At one point, Elaine glanced at me and tilted her head. "It's not about exclusivity, Jenna," she said, smiling the way people do when they're about to insult you gently. "It's about contribution, visibility. You know how these things go." I didn't answer. Dad coughed into his napkin. Dylan looked at his phone. Before I left, Mom packed me a to-go container, shrimp and grits still warm. "You always liked these," she said. "Take them, in case you don't feel like cooking later." She didn't meet my eyes. Back in my car, the container fogged up in the passenger seat. It smelled like Sundays when I was 12, when Dylan and I used to argue over who got the last biscuit, when Grandpa Calvin would sit at the head of the table, quiet but watchful. My phone buzzed. Teresa. I didn't even have to open it. She always knew when something cracked inside me. The text preview read, "They've already picked their heir apparent. You need to see this." I pulled into my driveway and clicked the link she sent. It led to the Walker Family Fund's official page, brand new header photo. Dylan in a tailored navy suit standing next to Elaine, who wore a silk blouse the color of champagne. Underneath, bold text, Next Gen Leadership, Dylan Walker, Building the Future with Elaine Roberts. I stared at it for a long time. The sun had started to dip below the live oaks lining the street, casting long shadows across my kitchen as I stepped inside. The scent of the leftover bread I'd planned to drop off at the community center still hung in the air. I flipped the oven on again, distracted, hoping to crisp it back up, but I didn't hear the timer. By the time I remembered, smoke had begun to curl from the edges. I grabbed an oven mitt, yanked the tray out, and stared at the blackened crust. The center had sunken too, burned and hollow. I set the tray down with more force than necessary and dropped into the nearest chair. The wooden one Calvin had refinished for me the summer before he died. My eyes landed on the recipe box nearby, the one he carved from leftover cedar. I hadn't opened it in months. I pulled open the lid. Inside, between two faded index cards, was a folded slip of paper I didn't remember tucking in. My name in his handwriting, neat, clear. "One day," it read, "you'll have to stand alone. That's when your name will matter most." I held the note a long time. Then I rose, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and walked over to the file cabinet where I kept everything labeled and numbered, just like he taught me. I opened the drawer, pulled out the slim gray folder marked Trust Documents, Legal, and laid it flat on the counter. They thought they were the future. They forgot who held the keys. My grandfather didn't leave me a throne. He left me a legal hammer and a ticking clock. The morning started with soft rain and the smell of old paper. I hadn't meant to open the fireproof safe that early, but sleep had been patchy and my mind wouldn't settle. My kitchen still held the scent of yesterday's sweet potato pie. I'd baked it from memory from Calvin's old recipe, but I forgot to tent the edges, and the crust had burned again. I didn't throw it out, just left it on the stovetop like a warning. The safe clicked open with a quiet finality. Inside, next to our family deed copies and my birth certificate, was the binder Grandpa Calvin gave me 6 years ago. Dark green, aged leather, corners rubbed smooth. I ran my fingers along the edge before pulling it out and laying it on the table. The cover page was exactly how I remembered it. Trust terms. Calvin E. Walker. Revocable Living Trust. Now irrevocable. I flipped to the section labeled Successor Trustee. There it was, plain as day. Jenna Elise Walker, to assume full duties at age 25. It was dated, signed, notarized. My parents didn't have to like it, but they couldn't change it. I pulled out my laptop and scheduled a Zoom with Joseph Linwood, our family's longtime estate attorney. Calvin always said Joseph was more backbone than lawyer, and I believed it. He was the kind of man who still wore suspenders and sent handwritten Christmas cards. His face popped up on screen right at 10 a.m. sharp, framed by bookshelves and a brass lamp in the background. "Jenna," he said, nodding once, "I've been expecting your call." "I need to confirm something," I said. "The trust. I'm still the sole trustee. No amendments, no revocations." Joseph reached for a file beside him, already anticipating the question. "There have been no updates to the document since your grandfather's passing," he said. "And under the terms of the trust, your authority is absolute unless legally challenged for cause," which would be difficult considering the language he used. He paused, then added, "No one else, your parents, your brother, has any legal claim or administrative authority." I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. It should have felt good. But the heaviness in my chest didn't lift. Later that afternoon, Teresa emailed me. Subject: "You didn't get this from me." Attached were 4 PDFs. I hesitated, then opened the first, an event deck labeled Legacy Gala. Proposed remarks. Dylan's name was on the front slide. Elaine's watermark floated quietly in the corner. Slide 3. Acknowledging past contributions and ushering in a new chapter. Slide 4. Dylan Walker, vision, stability, inheritance of values. The next attachment was worse. A speech draft, eloquent, full of hollow charm. Elaine had added notes in red. Consider subtle phrasing. Past leadership being honorable but outdated. The final file was labeled Post-Gala Messaging, a social media rollout schedule, hashtag ideas, and a press quote template from Corinne, my mother. "Teresa," I replied, "how did you—" She wrote back 2 minutes later, "Shared family folder. No one changed the permissions. They think no one's watching." I opened a Word doc and stared at the blinking cursor for a while. I typed a few lines. A possible speech. It started angry, then got too sentimental, then too polished. After 10 minutes, I deleted it all. I wasn't ready to fight in public. Not yet. Instead, I pulled the pie off the stove, sliced into it, and took a bite. The crust was dry and bitter, edges flaking like burnt bark. I chewed anyway, like it was something I deserved. That night, Joseph sent me a follow-up email, short and precise. Attached, certified court-confirmed appointment of sole trustee, Jenna Elise Walker. I opened the file and stared at my name. Legal authority, official seal, date stamped. I printed it on thick paper and slid it into a plastic sleeve. Then I placed it gently in my purse tucked between my wallet and a half-used grocery list. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it, but I knew I'd need it soon. Just before bed, my phone buzzed. A forwarded email from an old friend of the family. Subject, Legacy Gala Preview, save the date. The highlight? Keynote speaker, Dylan Walker. Future forward, honoring our legacy. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I shut the laptop and turned off the lights. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, but inside, the storm was just beginning. They sat me near the kitchen door with the toddlers, like I hadn't balanced this family's books for 3 summers straight. Dinner at my parents' house had always followed a particular rhythm. Napkins folded into triangles, cornbread steaming in a wicker basket lined with floral cloth, pitchers of sweet tea beating with condensation. But this time, everything felt arranged, like a stage set rather than a family meal. Elaine greeted me at the door, glowing in a soft lavender wrap dress and pearl earrings that sparkled under the hallway chandelier. "Jenna," she said with a gracious nod. "You made it?" "Thanks," I replied. "It's my parents' house." She didn't seem to hear me, already turning toward the dining room with a glass of white wine balanced effortlessly in her hand. The table stretched down the room like a runway. Dylan was already seated at the head, in Dad's usual spot, chatting with Uncle Leo about speaker lineups and presentation flow. Teresa waved me over from the far end, patting the seat beside her, an extra chair pulled from the breakfast nook. It sat a few inches lower than the others. From my place, I could hear the clatter of dishes from the kitchen door swinging open every few minutes, letting out a blast of warmth and the scent of collards, candied yams, and buttered rolls. I pulled my napkin into my lap and looked down the line of faces, all glowing with anticipation. Not one looked back. Dinner began with a toast. Elaine stood, her wineglass catching the chandelier light. "To new beginnings," she said, her voice smooth and airy, "to family, and to the future of the Walker name." Murmured affirmations floated around the table. Dylan rose next, straightening his blazer like he was at a press conference. "We're excited to share our vision at the gala," he began. "We've been working closely with the committee on how to position our family legacy for the next decade." I didn't blink. I didn't speak. Elaine beamed at him, then reached for the wine pitcher. She poured a generous glass for herself, a smaller one for Dylan, and passed it to her right, skipping the 2 empty chairs beside me. Across the table, Mom clasped her hands together, eyes a little too bright. "Jenna's always been the quiet one," she said lightly. "But Dylan was born for this." Dad cleared his throat but didn't look up. Teresa glanced at me and raised an eyebrow. "Sweet tea?" she asked, reaching for the pitcher. I nodded, too tight in the chest to manage words. Plates clattered and conversation flowed around me. I listened to Aunt Diane suggest gold-embossed menus. I watched Elaine nod politely when Russell mentioned a church sponsorship. I stared at the broken slice of chess pie set before me. Cracked down the middle, the crust uneven. It looked like someone had dropped it, then decided it was still good enough for me. Near the end of the meal, Teresa leaned in and adjusted her napkin. It was monogrammed, an older linen, probably from Grandma Ruth's collection. Her fingers worked carefully at the fold, and when she passed it to me, it was slightly heavier than it should have been. I took it, puzzled, and slipped it under the table. Inside was a small black USB drive. Teresa didn't say a word. She just refolded her own napkin and reached for a second helping of yams. When I got home, I didn't even take off my coat. I plugged the drive into my laptop and waited. There were 6 folders, one marked event messaging, another contingency plans. But it was the last one, narrative control, that made my fingers still. Inside were email exchanges between Elaine and Dylan. Subject lines like, strategic repositioning, media readiness, perception mapping. One line in particular caught me like a slap. We need to shift public perception. Jen has been disengaged for years. We can frame this as a natural evolution. Another, timestamped just 4 days ago. We should get ahead of any backlash by praising her quiet strength. Makes her seem complicit in the transition, even if she's not. My jaw clenched. I kept reading. Legacy belongs to those who claim it, Elaine had written in one message. Jenna lacks follow-through. She won't fight, not publicly. At the bottom of the last file, one final email, sent just that morning, Elaine to Dylan. By the time she realizes what we've done, the microphone will already be in your hand. I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked to the kitchen. The pie was still there, half-eaten, dry at the edges. I stared at it for a long moment before tossing the rest into the bin. Then I stood by the sink, arms crossed, watching the quiet drizzle of Charleston evening through the window. They thought they could edge me out with toasts and tone. They thought my silence meant surrender. But Calvin didn't raise me to be agreeable. He raised me to wait, to watch, and when the moment was right, to pull. And that moment was coming. The chandeliers looked like they belonged to Versailles. The lies did too. The Charleston Heritage Club had been transformed into something between a museum and a stage play. The marble floors gleamed like they'd been hand-polished with intention, the walls papered in soft florals and gold trim. Everywhere I looked, there were candles in hurricane vases and roses in deep autumn shades. The Walker family crest was projected onto a screen near the bar, spinning slowly. At the entrance, a sign welcomed guests, Legacy in Motion, the future of the Walker family. Beneath it, a cocktail menu offered the signature drink, the Calvin, bourbon, orange peel, splash of soda. I didn't touch it. The string quartet played Autumn Leaves in the corner. Waiters moved gracefully through the crowd, offering crab cakes and rosemary almonds on silver trays. I stayed near the back, watching, listening. Calvin once told me, the louder the applause, the smaller the truth. I kept my fingers wrapped around the velvet pin on my dress, the one that used to sit on his lapel during formal dinners. Tonight, it anchored me. The MC, Councilman Ellis, took the mic, his voice warm and practiced. We gather tonight not just to celebrate where the Walker name has been, he said, but to honor where it's going. He smiled toward my parents in the front row. With gratitude to Russell and Corinne for their stewardship and to the next generation, led by Dylan Walker, for continuing the family's mission, a soft wave of applause swept through the room. Elaine was already standing. Her gown shimmered like champagne under the lights, and her smile had just the right mix of modesty and triumph. She touched Dylan's elbow as he rose. Dylan took the stage like he'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. His suit was crisp, his smile tight. Good evening, he began. I want to thank everyone for being here to celebrate not just our legacy, but our vision. Tonight isn't just about our past. It's about the next 10 years. The next 100, I remained seated at the furthest table, half shadowed near the ballroom's side wall. I traced my fingers slowly along the edge of my plate, breathing steadily. The sealed envelope lay in my bag, next to the court order and the note from Calvin. I carried with me like armor. Dylan's speech continued, polished and hollow. He spoke of philanthropy, of preserving tradition while embracing progress. He used phrases like positioning the family brand and honoring our foundational pillars. Behind him, Elaine nodded encouragingly. Flashbulbs blinked from the corner where the press had been invited. I glanced toward the front. My mother clutched a tissue with both hands, her shoulders rigid. My father had that fixed half-smile he wore whenever he was confused, but unwilling to admit it. Councilman Ellis returned to the microphone. As we move into the dinner portion of the evening, we encourage everyone to enjoy the buffet and... Excuse me. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Councilman Ellis turned, surprised. Head swiveled. A waiter nearly stumbled. I stepped out from the shadows, heels clicking softly against the floor, envelope in hand. I believe there's been a small misunderstanding, I said. Elaine's expression faltered. Dylan lowered the mic. I reached the stage and handed the envelope to Councilman Ellis. If you'd be so kind, I said. He opened it, eyes scanning the top page, his brow furrowed. I turned to face the room, my voice calm. I wasn't cut off, I said. I was put in charge. A silence fell, sharp and absolute. I am the sole trustee of the Walker Family Trust, named by Calvin Walker, court confirmed, legally binding. I pulled the court-stamped document from my bag, unfolded it, and held it up so the press in the back could capture the seal. Joseph Linwood rose from a corner table and walked forward, briefcase in hand. Elaine stepped back, her mouth parted slightly. She reached for Dylan's arm, but he didn't move. She's bluffing, Elaine said, laughing a little too loud. She's just... Her heel caught the edge of the stage platform. The laughter died on her lips as she staggered sideways. The clatter of her fall echoed off the vaulted ceilings, followed by a collective gasp. Several guests rushed to help her up. I didn't move. Councilman Ellis, eyes wide, stepped aside as Joseph joined me. "We can go over the language now," Joseph said, opening his briefcase, "or I can read aloud from Section 4. Your choice." My mother stood up, trembling. "Jenna," she whispered, "why didn't you tell us?" I looked at her steady. "Because you weren't listening." Across the room, someone snapped a picture. The flash caught Calvin's pin on my dress, the court order in my hand. Elaine crouched near the floor, holding her ankle like the night had betrayed her. I stepped down from the stage and returned to my seat without another word. The waitstaff resumed moving slowly. The quartet began a soft jazz number to fill the silence. But the air had changed. Something had cracked. And it wasn't just Elaine's heel. By morning, the Charleston Chronicle headline read, "Heiress reclaims legacy at High Society Gala." They used an older photo of me, hair pulled back, a smile too polite to be real. Below it, a caption in bold, "Walker family dynamics take sharp turn as legal control confirmed." I sat at my kitchen table, holding a lukewarm mug of coffee. Outside, the November sky hung low and gray, as if the clouds themselves were withholding comment. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Some were congratulatory, others less so. "You've embarrassed your parents," one aunt wrote. "About time someone stood up," said a younger cousin I barely knew. One reply from Uncle Gene simply read, "So this is who you are now?" I hadn't answered any of them. As a teenager, I once ran for class president. I lost by 12 votes. I cried in the bathroom stall until my throat hurt. That night, Calvin found me sitting on the porch steps, arms around my knees. He handed me a root beer and said, "You didn't lose. You revealed who was afraid of you." I'd never forgotten that. Joseph Linwood came by later that afternoon. He brought folders, of course. Legal updates, a foundation roadmap, a few government forms I needed to file by month's end, but he also brought a small tin of tea biscuits. "My wife says you look tired on the news," he said, sliding the tin across my table. "Figured you could use something soft." We spent an hour reviewing responsibilities. Joseph spoke in his usual steady rhythm, never once pressing. When we were done, he folded his hands and said, "You know, Jenna, The ink says, "Your trustee." But the room last night, that's what made it real. After he left, I moved to Calvin's old study, the one I'd converted into my reading room. The scent of cedar still clung to the desk drawers. His cigar box sat unopened, right beside the journals I hadn't touched in years. Teresa arrived with 2 coffees and a paper bag. "I brought pie," she said. "The good kind. No crust burning today." We sat cross-legged on the rug, sifting through Calvin's notebooks. One page held ideas for community grants. Another listed business names: Jenna's Oven, Walker's Place, Legacy Bakes. His handwriting tilted forward, urgent but clear. Teresa nudged a page toward me. It was a sketch of a bakery floor plan: countertops, ovens, seating for 10. At the top, he'd scribbled, "Use the trust to build, not just preserve." I couldn't speak. I just stared at it. The room suddenly warm and close. That evening, I found a pot on my doorstep. Collard greens, still warm, covered with foil. No note, just the familiar casserole dish with a crack in one handle. Dad's way of speaking without speaking. I left it on the counter. Not ready to eat it, not ready to forgive, but not ready to throw it out either. Later, I opened the bottom drawer of Calvin's desk and found a sealed envelope I'd somehow never noticed. My name was written across the front in his looping script. Below it, in smaller print, "If they make you doubt, open this." My hands shook a little as I slid a finger under the flap. Inside, just one line: "They'll come for your title, not your values. Protect the values." I held it for a long time, the paper soft with age, the ink slightly smudged on the left corner. He must have written it months before he died, maybe longer. Sometimes people leave you tools. Other times, they leave you convictions. I stood and walked back into the kitchen. The sky had darkened outside, the street lamp casting a yellow haze across the porch. My phone buzzed again. I let it ring once, twice, before picking it up. "Mom?" I said. A pause, then her voice, quieter than I expected. "Thanksgiving's in 2 weeks. I don't expect you to come, but I hope you do." She didn't say more. She didn't have to. When we hung up, I pulled out the calendar from the fridge and circled the date, not as a commitment, as a question. Then I turned back to the bakery sketch and laid it flat beside my laptop. I opened a new document, typed the title: Walker Legacy Initiative, Phase 1, Grant Application Program. The cursor blinked, waiting. So was I. I didn't return to prove anything. I returned to plant something. Thanksgiving week arrived in Charleston with a chill that tugged at sleeves and carried the scent of cinnamon through the air. The sky was a soft gray canvas, diffusing the morning light across the community center courtyard. Folding chairs lined the edges, a small podium stood by the brick wall, and above it hung a simple banner: Calvin Walker Legacy Initiative, Launch Day. Fresh rolls sat on warming trays beside pitchers of spiced cider. Cinnamon sticks floated in clear glasses. Someone had arranged mason jars filled with lemon sprigs. Teresa's idea. I stood near the registration table, my coat still buttoned, Calvin's pocket watch pinned just over my heart. I could feel its gentle weight like a quiet rhythm, grounding me. The first guests trickled in, some family, some neighbors, a few curious high schoolers eyeing the grant table. Teresa moved among them with the energy of someone who believed in every word we'd written in our proposal packet. She wore a burnt orange coat and carried a clipboard like a conductor's baton. "Everything okay?" she asked, handing me a small envelope. I nodded. Better than okay. Inside the envelope were printed name tags for our first round of applicants. Students, bakery apprentices, one girl who wanted to open a food truck specializing in elder care meals. The old Calvin would have liked that. Dylan arrived just before the ribbon cutting, wearing jeans and an old flannel I recognized. It was one I'd given him for his birthday years ago, back when we still left notes on each other's doors. He walked up slowly, holding a foil-covered plate. "Made these this morning," he said, passing it to me. "I remembered the icing this time." I peeled back the foil. Sweet rolls. Slightly uneven, a little underbaked in the middle, but warm, honest. "Thank you," I said. He looked around. "Feels different." "It is," I said. "On purpose." Our parents arrived soon after. Corinne wore navy and pearls. Russell had on his usual beige jacket, looking slightly lost but trying. They greeted the few guests they recognized and settled near the cider table. When it was time, Teresa stepped to the microphone. She cleared her throat and began, her voice bright with purpose. "Calvin Walker believed legacy wasn't what you protected. It was what you shared," she said. "Jenna didn't just protect the Walker legacy. She expanded it. She made room for it to grow." I stepped forward as the applause died down and cut the ribbon with a quiet snip. The fabric fluttered to the pavement. From somewhere in the back, someone began to clap, then more joined, not loud or showy, just steady. After the ceremony, people wandered toward the booths. Young applicants asked questions. Volunteers passed out grant forms. I stood near the edge of the crowd, soaking it in. Corinne approached slowly. She opened her arms in hesitation, and I stepped into them, our hug stiff but sincere. She slipped something small into my palm. "This belonged to Calvin's mother," she said. "She wore it every Sunday." It was a brooch, gold and oval-shaped, the clasp still warm from her hands. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. The event was beginning to wind down when a girl about 16 approached. She held a sketchbook close to her chest and wore a backpack too heavy for her frame. "Miss Walker?" she asked. I smiled. "Call me Jenna." She hesitated, then opened her sketchbook. "I think I have something to build. I just don't know how to start." I looked at her designs, rough bakery floor plans, notes in the margins, ingredient lists with prices circled. Her hands trembled slightly. I gestured to the folding chairs nearby. "Pull up a chair," I said. "Let's get to work." She sat. We opened her sketchbook together, and the world got a little quieter, a little clearer. Later, as the crowd thinned and people gathered their coats, Russell lingered at the edge of the courtyard. He looked toward the banner, then back at me. "He picked right," he said softly, his voice catching in the cool air. I didn't answer. I just nodded, one hand brushing the edge of the watch pinned to my chest. Sometimes, legacy isn't about who you inherit from. It's about what you choose to leave behind. And that morning, surrounded by warmth, questions, and the scent of fresh bread, I began to rebuild. One name, one hand, one sketchbook at a time. When that young girl sat beside me with her sketchbook, I didn't see the past. We'd all survived that. I saw the future taking its first breath, fragile but real. Sometimes, what we inherit isn't land or money. It's a burden to break silence, to rebuild trust, and to plant what wasn't allowed to grow before. Family doesn't always get it right the first time. But when we lead with values instead of vengeance, even broken roots can grow strong again. In life, the legacy that matters most is the one we share. If this story reminded you of something in your own life, a moment of turning, of healing, I'd be honored to hear it. Feel free to share your thoughts or memories in the comments, and thank you for listening.